our next speaker, which is Mark Lamb, who is the CEO of CoinFloor, which is a Bitcoin exchange. So Mark, if you could come up to the stage, please.
So I will be talking more about CoinFloor towards the end, but most of this talk is going to be about Bitcoin and why it is important. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thanks to Danielle and WBR for inviting me. The last time I was in Paris, the euro was still in use. Or, sorry, the franc was still in use, and the euro was being transitioned over. And what we got with the euro all over Europe was a nearly globally recognized but international currency, and most of euros, most dollars, and most British pounds were held in purely digital form, so it could be transported all over the world. But I'm not here to talk about the euro, the dollar, or the pound. I'm here to talk about all sorts of money, and specifically Bitcoin. It's a new money and a new currency, and a what requires a why. So I'll be talking about why Bitcoin needs to exist and why it does exist. So just to recap a little bit about the history of money, any gold bug will tell you why gold was used as money for 6,000 years. It was divisible, fungible, durable. We've all heard these things before, I'm sure. Fundamentally important was the scarcity, there being a limited supply naturally capped out by the laws of the earth. This helped prove gold's value. But the reasons why gold had value for 6,000 years as a global currency are well known. And the reason why it's still in use today as a hedge are also well known. But why did it shift? How did we get the shift? It's impossible. It became impossible as globalization and the emerging of sophisticated financial markets. Gold became impractical and impossible to use for long distance or high-speed transactions, particularly impossible without a counterparty. So this is, there's a slide missing there. I'll just ignore that. The next slide was going to be talking about central banks. Now, central banking emerged from this deficiency in gold. It emerged as essentially a hub and spokes model where you'd have a central bank holding gold and then issuing it out as paper notes. Eventually, gold was disposed, but central banks provided several important advantages. They could be essentially a trusted asset ledger. And the beauty of this was that in order to make a long-distance transaction or in order to make 1,000 transactions a day, all you had to do was notify the central ledger. And this is the way central banks worked. It became the way for many financial institutions. Equities markets, you notify the central ledger, a trade happens, you don't actually have to have any sort of physical passing of assets. You can just notify the central ledger. A number of financial markets developed through this way, and this allowed us to build up a complex and powerful system of financial and capital formation. The first equities markets emerged, and however, what we gained in the speed and convenience of transactions, we paid for in a 98% loss in the value of central bank notes. It was probably a fair price, but we did lose 98% of the value in the last 100 years. And so another thing with the hub and spokes model, you have an incredible centralization of trust, which is great because it allows a lot of financial transactions to occur, but you do also have central points of failure. And when Lehman Brothers collapsed, it didn't just threaten the existence of Lehman Brothers. All of the counterparty trades were threatened, and thus the entire US and to a large extent global financial markets were threatened because of that counterparty risk and because of that centralization of trust. In a similar manner, Cyprus threatened the stability of the euro, And this is a result of centralization of trust into various counterparties. Who can guess? Does anyone have any idea what this is? This is a map of internet traffic. Now, essentially, this is just traffic bouncing from server to server, client to client, computer to computer. But one of the beautiful things about the internet is if any of these nodes were taken out, or even a swath of these nodes were destroyed, the internet as a whole would still function. You'd still be able to use Gmail, you'd still be able to use Amazon, you'd still be able to use the stock exchange. And this is because the internet is decentralized. It's completely decentralized. It still relies on central servers, but the existence of it is decentralized. And before the dot-com boom, the idea that you could trust the internet to do important things, video conferencing, meetings, trading equities, the idea that all equities would be eventually traded online, at first, that was insane. Electronically, they eventually became electronic, but the idea that almost all financial and commerce would take place over the internet, the idea that a volunteer-based encyclopedia, which billions of people could access, these ideas would be laughed out of the room. Decentralization as a model, as a structure, is here to stay. And now that's where we get into what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a decentralized asset ledger. It takes the concept of a central bank and says, we can do this in an architecture similar to the internet. We can build a decentralized asset ledger. It's divisible and fungible just like paper notes and just like gold, but it's much more. You can divide one single Bitcoin into 100 million subunits. It gains its durability from decentralization. And perhaps the most important thing for value preservation in the Bitcoin system is that the supply is mathematically limited to 21 million Bitcoins that will ever exist. Also important is Bitcoin allows people to send value at near zero cost anywhere in the world. And we'll see that next. This is actually a Bitcoin transaction. Someone is sending what is now worth 60 million euros. They're sending it, we don't know from where to where they're sending it, but it could be from here to New Zealand. The transaction happened instantly, cleared within 10 minutes. And as you can see on the fees section, no fees were paid. Sometimes you do pay fees, but they're never really more than a penny. For the most part. So this, hold on just a sec. Oh, and to show what I mean by an actual public asset ledger and a decentralized asset ledger, I'm actually going to show you some Bitcoin addresses. These anyone can view. So interestingly enough, a central bank or a financial institution, CoinFloor, for example, our assets aren't public, our client funds aren't public, we don't publish lists of our customers' balances, but this decentralized asset ledger, this Bitcoin blockchain, it's called a blockchain, is completely public. Anyone can do an audit. And part of the underlying support infrastructure of the network is tens and hundreds of thousands of computers, all of which are doing audits of this asset ledger list all the time, every day. So, but one thing that's fundamentally important is although you can see these balances, and actually one of these balances is owned by a major Western government, I won't share which for the privacy of that government, but you can see these balances, but you can't see the identities behind them. So it remains private, it remains confidential, but it is publicly auditable and publicly accountable. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with Metcalfe's law. It's a bit dated, but it's still relevant today. This was the idea that the strength of a network, the value of that network, is dependent on the number of connections that can be made in that network. So 2 nodes, 1 connection. 5 nodes, 10 connections between those 5 nodes. With 12 nodes, you can get 66 connections. And so a telecommunication, this law was originally made for telecommunications and later applied to Ethernet and then the rise of the internet. But with telecommunications, 1 phone is useless. 1 email address is completely useless. There's no value in that. But when you have a system where millions and then eventually billions of people are connected to these devices and are essentially acting as nodes, that's when it becomes not just valuable, but crucial. You can't exist without it. No one here could do their work without email. And so these network effects are very strong. Many people have heard of the word network effect from social networks, but they're actually relatively weak in social networks compared to how strong they are in currency. Just look at the US dollar, which is considered the global reserve currency, or the euro, where a bunch of European nations said, we'd rather have 1 currency. Why? It has a stronger network effect. There's a powerful effect from Metcalfe's law that you get when you have millions of people, hundreds of millions of people connected. And so Bitcoin was released open source 5 years ago. And when it originally existed, it was just a few people using it, and it was made completely public, and more people joined, more people started using the system. The network effect grew, and now we have something where the entire economy of the system is worth around 4.5 billion euros. The value of the system is worth 4.5 billion euros. And as more people use it, this is with roughly 2 to 5 million users. We don't know exactly how many users there are. And by the way, just to make it clear, Bitcoin is not a company. I don't work for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is completely decentralized in that no company, individual, organization controls it or runs it. It's completely based on the laws of mathematics and completely run decentralized. But with 2 to 5 million people using it, it's gained $4.5 billion euros worth of value. And as more people accept it, the value of the network grows. So Bitcoin, it's established that, what is it? It's a currency. It allows people to pay for things. People are buying houses, cars, food with Bitcoin today. But what else is it? It's more than just a currency. Because an asset ledger can be used for more than just a unit of currency. An asset ledger, you can put things in and have them represent other things other than just currency. Also, because the system is open, you can program all sorts of interesting things in, such as smart contracts. Now, what if you could have a contract with someone that was mathematically impossible for them to break? You wouldn't have to trust that person you were doing business with, because the contract was impossible to break. So you know they're going to they can't renege on the contract. They're just going to lose. They could have some way of losing money, or they can't break it. But what Bitcoin enables is something called smart contracts and smart property, where it's impossible for someone to break a contract. It also enables multi-signature escrow, which is programmed into the system. There are a number of people that need to sign off. CoinFloor is actually the first Bitcoin company and Bitcoin exchange to use multi-signature escrow for all client deposits. And this means for any client funds to be retrieved, multiple people have to sign off. And there's a lot of things you can program in. Banking for the 3.5 billion underbanked. So M-Pesa recently integrated with a mobile wallet that allows people to use Bitcoin. So anyone in Kenya who uses M-Pesa, which is the most popular mobile money system, can now use Bitcoin and send money to anywhere in the world. Crowdfunding and equity markets can be programmed in. I could get into all the other things that Bitcoin enables, but there's simply not enough time. Okay, so practical impact. This is all fine, and it sounds like a nice dream, but what's the value? What does it practically mean? Goldman Sachs recently did a report, and they estimated that the 3 sectors, retail, e-commerce, and remittances, that doesn't go into some of the other things I've discussed, financial markets and equities and legal contracts. But retail, e-commerce, and remittances could save $210 billion a year from using the Bitcoin system. Also, they're using a bit of a high estimate on terms of the price of using Bitcoin. So it could potentially be a lot more. But let's discuss some of the problems Bitcoin faces. Liquidity. There are 100,000 Bitcoin traded a day at current prices of, I think the price right now, I don't know what the price right now is, but at current prices, that's around 50 to 100 million euros per day. That's clearly not enough liquidity for large investors, and we've got some ways to address that. Mt. Gox, the largest exchange, went bankrupt. They do not know where their customer funds are, and they're completely unregulated, and they've went bankrupt, and Bitcoin companies remain unregulated. Now, what is the future of this currency? Well, there's a new generation of Bitcoin exchanges launching, new generation of venues. CoinFloor is one of them. Second Market in New York is doing a member-style exchange for Wall Street banks and institutions. They're hoping to launch that this summer. And multiple VC firms have committed to investing hundreds of millions of dollars into Bitcoin startups. Most VC companies can't actually invest into the assets themselves, but they can invest in the startups. CoinFloor is the only provably solvent exchange. We're releasing that hopefully later today, that we will be doing a proof of solvency. And we're launching an OTC market for financial institutions to be able to trade large blocks and trade comfortably. We're launching an OTC market for Bitcoin trading. We've launched 2 weeks ago a central limit order book market, and we are basically the London-based venue for Bitcoin trading. And with that, I'll give it up for questions.
So over to the audience. Anybody got any questions? Can I see any hands up? No, okay. Thank you. You got one?
Hi.
Oh, yeah? Go for it.
Obviously, decentralization is the strength of the system, but it's also, I think, one of the biggest weaknesses of the system. Because what do you think it would take for nations to decide this is an illegal currency? And the whole thing would be dead, right?
No, part of the beauty of Bitcoin is that any nation, any individual nation, or even a group of nations could decide Bitcoin, we want to regulate it to death, or we want to do this or that, although so far most nations have said we don't want to regulate it and we're completely fine with it. But any nation could make it illegal, and there would be no problems. That's actually the beauty of decentralization, is that just like the internet, nothing can shut it down. In fact, a bit more so than the internet, Bitcoin, you could turn off you'd have to turn off every computer in the world at the same time to shut down the Bitcoin network. And so a nation can try, but there's nothing they can do. And so most nations and most central banks and most financial regulators, we've talked to many of them, and what they've said is, this sounds great, we don't have any problems with this, but we're not going to regulate Bitcoin companies, but we're going to see what happens, and we will think about regulating them in the future. And yeah, we've had a very good response from governments because they see the benefits, right? They see the benefits of having a completely open system, of having a system that can bank and serve people who are not served today. and having a system where contracts can be completely enforced.
So Mark, what went wrong with that exchange that went bust?
Well,
the recoverability of the funds.
Yeah, so it's still unclear, right? But what basically went wrong is a bunch of people trusted their money to a CEO who was 88% owner in the company. There was no board, there was no oversight, and the only guy who knew how to touch the funds, the only guy who had any control over the source code and everything in the company, it was one guy. He could make mistakes. We've had many audits. We're publishing cryptographic audits. A number of companies, the entire Bitcoin industry has responded to this and taken up that burden and said, we're gonna do things better. We're not gonna trust all of our Bitcoin to one person. We're going to split things into multi-signature escrow, and we're going to do things differently. And basically, this has meant that what happened with Mt. Gox, it's impossible for that to happen with institutions that are doing it right. And that's where Second Market's doing it. That's the way Second Market's going to be doing it, probably. That's the way we're doing it.
Great. Any more questions? Time for one more? Yep, that.
How can you guarantee liquidity if there's going to be a fixed supply of Bitcoins?
This is actually one point that I forgot to mention, but is probably one of the most important points. We're partnering with an FCA-regulated, very well-known financial institution who will be acting as a market maker in our OTC market and basically guaranteeing liquidity. So we have a number of institutions that are interested, and we have one that we've designated as a market maker, and they're going to be providing liquidity. So that's what we're announcing today. And if you have any questions about the OTC market or our order book market, I'll be available later to talk.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.